Hey guys, today we're gonna do another city. I did a city a week ago, but that's the prompt for today. So I decided to take a different approach this time and do sort of a low-rise city with that peaked roof style. I just kind of immediately thought Venice would be a cool city to cover since it's pretty different from the other city that I tackled, that kind of futuristic quick city I did. And yeah, so let's get started with that. I'm just going to use a plane today. Open the shader editor right here, add a new material, and I'm going to go to cycles render right here. And as always, we're going to go to the settings tab, settings down here, and click displacement only. And that will allow us to modify the geometry. Right now we only have 4 points, so we need more geometry to work with. So we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier right here. Bring that up, turn to simple, so it won't smooth out as we subdivide it more. And yeah, and I've got my reference right here to look at and take from. And then yeah, as always, make sure Node Wrangler is activated in the add-ons menu in preferences. So this is checked, and that will give me all these shortcut keys. And speaking of shortcut keys, let me just add that with the add-on I've got right here. So now you can see all the keys that I'm pressing right here, so you can kind of follow along. And yeah, so let's gonna just focus on the big shapes at first. So there's all of these different layers on the roofing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create gradients that have kind of a randomness rotation in 2 directions, and see where that takes us. So to do that, I'm going to have an object coordinate. I'm just going to be using UVs for today, so that's just 2 axes. So use the Y and the X, or the U and the V. Yeah, so to get those peak roofs, I'm going to kind of modify this. So in 2 ways. One of them, well, in both ways it's going to be with vector transform. So modulo cuts up the UVs. So we see this is the x-axis, and now when it's not 0, it starts showing up, and we can see that it's modifying there. If I change that to like 0.2, we get it. That's 1 divided by 5, so we get 5 times. Yeah, and if I do the same to this one, so this is 0.2. We get the same pattern we have here, except it's a little bit darker, and that's because it's just taking a slice of it, and then repeating that slice. So we're actually going to use a scale, so this will give us, and then by a factor of 5, that'll make it brighter. And because we want to change these, be able to adjust these with ease, I'm going to use a math node just to make that conversion. So if I have this value node, so I can change the number with this, and so I don't have to change it on these ones. So if I just plug this into here and then change this to divide, so 1 divided by whatever this is exactly what we want here. If we plug this in scale, this is the same relationship that we want for these. So when I change this, this is good. So yeah, otherwise, if this was plugged into here, let's see what that looks like. We're going to get, well, yeah, see, it starts getting darker as we get more. So that's why that conversion is important. And then the other thing we want to be able to use is the actual position of each of these cells. So right now, these are the positions within the cell, which is handy. Like if you were to add, let's say, like a noise texture, we're getting that repeating on each of these. But yeah, but to control the position, because I want to create randomness in this, we're going to use another vector node called snap. So if I go down here to snap, and we're going to adjust this, so notice at 0.2, again there's 5, so we'll just plug this right in there, because that's the same relationship as we've had otherwise. And yeah, and if I go to texture and then white noise, or no. So I'll just put this over here so I'm not covering what I'm what I'm doing. So if I go into, so texture and then white noise at the very bottom, and I plug that into here. So we're sampling this right now, and if I put that in front, you can now see what's going on in this texture. So it's just creating random values, and we could use black and white, which is the other option up here. And yeah, so there's a random noise, and if we want random rotation on these on the roofing, we can use this as a mask. So it's going to be either or, so less than or greater than black or white, and so we can use that to mask it out. And if I check this out, we can use a separate right here, so we have this going either direction. And yeah, so if I use this mix node right here, put this in the factor, put these two directions, x or y, we're getting a maze pattern, which is pretty cool if I say so myself. And we're going to shift it over so the end of it is in the middle, and you'll see why in a second. So negative 0.5. And if we want it to reflect on the other side, I'm going to use absolute value. So absolute makes all the negative things positive, and so it creates a reflection on either side. So black is 0, white is there. So all the black part before this was negative, and then we just reflect it, and now we're separating it. So yeah, that's how you do that. And yeah, so we're getting, not quite the same type of randomness. There's smaller buildings on top of smaller buildings. We can do a little bit of that, maybe with another Voronoi texture that can do a similar thing. Yeah, there's a lot of power in knowing how to do that. And yeah, so what should we do next? If I use this color ramp, we can control the height here. And remember, we activated the vector displacement, so if I add a vector displacement node right here, so that remember that was Shift A to add a node, we just plug that in there, put that in the height, and yeah, we're starting to get, we have a slope here, we only have 2 points from this, and yeah, that's pretty extreme, right? And we can adjust the scale here, but I actually like to adjust the scale there, but yeah, so I like to put it on this. Yeah. I like to just use the multiply node so that we can just add things on top of each other for this. So yeah, instead of this, yeah, and so let's add enough to have siding. We don't have, because this is a plane and it's all coming down to straight upwards, we won't get much definition on the sides of the buildings, but we can just do enough to get some in. This will work more with more subdivisions. But the sharper the edges, the more likely there are going to be errors in your displacement. Just because it always has to decide. These are all this shape is dependent on there being a pixel underneath, and it has to decide what's going to do there. So let's bring this as close to the top as possible. And so that we're just reassigning values to the gradient. Yeah, so if I bring this out, get a more peaked roof here. And we could actually make it so that it's more sloped on the side, so we have that that we can texture as well. Because if I mean, there might be geometry there in between it. There has to be to cut it out. We can see that with the normal output. Control Shift cycles through these. That's another handy thing. So I guess that's fine. You could. I guess it's just useful to know. I guess this is fine. And then you could, even if you want like a area to walk in between these, I guess we have like a nice gap there, so we could make like a cobblestone walkway texture there. Yeah, and I'd probably just mask that out with just what we have left of this. We could use the height, but the height might get confused if we use displacement. Like, yeah, I could just take like you know, generated coordinates and then XYZ, but if there's other stuff on, if I end up putting other stuff on the ground level, that might mess things up. So yeah, so let's add less than or greater than here. So we're going to use it to, so change this to greater than, plug this into value, and then we'll adjust it with threshold. So we can mask out the ground pretty closely. There. And we can use a mix. Oh. Mix shader, put it in the factor. And yeah, so how are we going to make bricks? Huh? We could just copy all this and then use that as a brick texture, I think. So yeah, just thinking, so that might work. If I use this, and so this affects the bias, so now it's all straight here, and then it's curved there. Yeah, could even group anything that's connected with shift right click, anything that uses the same input, and that'll be useful because when we group it, we'll make sure that everything's coming from the same thing. See, so that so let's just try copying this over again, or we can just use a Voronoi texture, give us a nice brick, and then there's different settings we can work it with. If I get this, so now it's totally random, but I can turn that down, and that's handy for just creating something like bricks that are offset right there. And let's make it distance the edge. We'll give you a sharp texture for that. Oh yeah, we can make that way smaller. And you can do similar stuff to what we just made, but you need a copy of this. So let's use the UV coordinates, and it's all going to be on the ground, so we don't have to worry about this stretching here. If I copy this, we just need to make sure these values are consistent, because unfortunately distance the edge doesn't have these color and position nodes, even though that it works with the same, like they overlap very well. I mean, yeah, they fit perfectly. So so we can use this roundness to create variations in the height and the value, and remember, just going back to how like light is higher and black is lower. So I'm doing well. Thanks for checking, Blaze. How you been? How are you? Yeah, so I'm just gonna, if I use a math node, it converts it to black and white. So that's a single value, whereas color or vectors are multiple values. And if I bring this down, we're reducing the contrast on this. And I'm gonna, linear light, we'll just adjust it in 2 different directions, so I can work with that. Oh, and it looks like I accidentally muted this, so I can press M to unmute that. Feature I very rarely use, but will often accidentally press. So, good, glad to hear it. And yeah, so you can see how it's kind of affecting this. If I use a color ramp on this, we can sort of fine tune. Maybe I don't want it to have a point on the top, so I can just sort of cut that off. And yeah, if I turn this down, we're losing that variation. Maybe I'll just use multiply, so it's just from the ground. Yeah, so we're getting some variation in the ground, and yeah, let's test it out with a shader. So principled shader, and let's plug it into the bump, so make sure that's in height, and I'm gonna add a point. Yeah, so that's enough light to make a judgment. So yeah, so we can cut off more of these top values. You can see that better from here. And as you can see, this is making it darker, so you know, to offset that, we could add a divide and then just you know, copy it, you know, use a value node and plug that into these. Let's see if that works. So this multiplies opposite divide, right? But we need to keep it between 0 and 1, because this one clamps at 1. So let's try multiply. Okay, so let's think about what I'm actually doing here. So maybe if I forget this and then add 0.5. So that's more, it's hard to tell if that's consistent or not, because I need to turn this down. But yeah, so now I'm introducing variation and there's less darkening. So now this range makes more sense. And then I can use that to, clip off the top. So you can see that. Remember, this is, we're seeing it on the roof, but we're only really going to see it down there. So it's a lot of effort for an area that we won't really end up seeing so much. And yeah, so it's looking good. Let's use that variation just for the color. We don't need maybe all the depth and occlusion from the scale that we're at. Sometimes those smaller details can get in the way of how something gets read. I mean, yeah, it might be nice to add like a little subtle aspect of that. But let's we can color this. Let's change this to multiply. Just choose the color you want. You can turn this all the way up if you want complete control over that. Complete change based on this color value. And I'm feeling maybe like just a light blue, or like sandstone is kind of like orangish. Brighten that up. And then if I look at this color, so we're not getting any color variation. Okay, yeah, so I guess what I had there for the multiply, it was making that difference too shallow. So I adjusted that. Yeah, and can actually switch these. So this will darken it, and then this will determine how much variation. We could use linear light, so that'll make more variation in either direction, lighter or darker. So that's nice for making variation. And then, yeah, so we have that. And let's see. Yeah, and then when we go back to this greater than value from this noise, we could try to make variation in this, but with several values, so we have more variation in the height. And I only want that variation to exist for areas that aren't on the ground, so we'll also mask that out because I want to leave ground space. So if I use this color ramp and use constant, we can use it similar to a greater than ramp, except we can use more values. So we have sharp values to make sure that it's not affecting different areas. So let's see, I think 5 different values would be probably good enough. I'm not concerned about the order of this because it's pretty random. So yeah, let's test how that looks, and we'll probably adjust it based on the outcome of this. So right here we already created our ground mask, I believe. And this is shown as white because it's just, that's where it decided for the vertex to lie, and that's kind of just slightly separate from what we set with this greater than. So we have to make that as close to 0.5 as possible without being 0.5. Yeah. And we can just use this mask with this. So the lightest parts here we actually want to mask out. So we're going to put that in the factor in this case, and then make the other one black. And that'll ensure that that part is masked out. So now I can add it to this displacement that we have here, right? So this is controlling the peaks of the houses. So I can use multiply, probably not multiply, probably add. So that's just putting one on top of the other in this case. And yes, we're getting that variation. This works like a multiplier value, right? So we just adjust the height of things. And I think we could get more variation in there too. Like, just adjust this until you have the thing we like. Obviously, so the white is going to be the tallest buildings, and then these other values are going to be different. Yeah, so if we adjust this, let's see. Yeah, so now we're getting different heights. Yeah, and let's put that iconic roofing on all of these. So to do that, we're going to, maybe we could just use, everything in theory is facing, let's see, so with separate, this might not behave as it would before displacement, right? So here we can see we're getting white everywhere because this is just a plane facing upwards. I'm going to save it real quick. But let's see if we can extract the top. So we can cut off the top of the greater than node. So that'll be our roof mask. We can use that to modify that material. And yeah, so let's quickly organize this. I think we have some clear categories here. So let's name that ground. And round. Hey, Dragus, welcome back as always. And then let's yeah, so and then down here we'll make this houses. houses. I must not be typer only when I'm live streaming. Just the nerves. So yeah, let's add another principled shader up here, and it's going to have to be according to the rotation of each of these. So to do that, we're going to use the grains that we got from here. So there's these separate right here. So we have this. We can just plug it into maybe a wave texture. Let's test that out. Yeah, so we have this. And if we could actually even use Reroute texture, because you get those vertical lines. But you notice these bricks, they have variation going in the other direction, but there's a clear difference between those two directions. So we can, to get that, we can do a similar thing that we had from over here. So yeah, and if it's unclear, this is running into that. So, oh yeah, we're going to be using distance and turning down the random and using 2D instead of 3D so that all the height is consistent for each of them. That's just a quirk of the Reroute texture, that difference between 2D and 3D. So this is actually running the opposite of what we want. If I use this, we just swap the X and the Y, and then mix that with this up here. So actually I could use combine X, Y, Z and plug that into Y. And now we're getting, this is kind of UV position. Actually, this one, use this as something else. What is this? Okay, that's the random height that we set up to put in there. So yeah, now we're getting the Reroute mapped out like similar to how we normally would. Well, and that's actually very similar to how we have it over here, except notice the axes are swapped in some places. And that'll be handy because we're going to adjust these positions. So if I use like right now it looks the same, but if I use vector and multiply, so this will change the size of each of these. It'll scale it on different axes, and yeah, so that's actually again the opposite of what we want. So I'm gonna scale that in. I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Yep. Just I think these live streams have been pretty successful. I'm glad that I've been able to make it this far. So yeah, in that context, pretty good. Thanks. And so I think I might. So I do want vertical lines for the other part, so I think I'll just use a vector from one of these, whichever. So if I use this, so that's going across, but yeah, no, I want to use the one going down, so it's Y. Yeah, and you see, because the way I have it set up back over here, Y means something else depending on the house. And so we have this, and we have this, the cells, and we can use this color ramp and just make it like this, and brighten this one up as well, and yeah, and let's add some more reddishness to that. This doesn't look great. It'll look better with more materials and just adjusting how much of each of these values each of these are going to get. And yeah, so to do that, we're just going to put that in there. Yeah, so it's looking maybe a bit pink. So turn down the saturation. Saturation is the amount of color in something, so we can just turn that down. And yeah, just make it, you know, and yeah, normal. Remember, this looks really bad because you don't plug in direct in normal. Use a bump map. And yeah, so we're getting these sharp lines, and that's just comes when you don't adjust the distance, because this smooth things out. So that's really important for shading. And we're not quite getting it. Maybe this profile is sharp in nature, so we can use a well, yeah, you could use a few things. I guess I'll use Rgb Curves. That kind of intuitively gives us a curve to work with. Let's try and move it the other way. Yeah, so it's starting to smooth out. Let's turn that. Might have to get it like really low in order to keep it smooth. Yeah, and then yeah. Yeah. So if we just look at this, I mean, if I want to modify all of this, if we just have the right values, we can adjust the color. We could even use color, which will just overwrite pretty much all of the color to how we want. So if we want to go more orange, yeah, we get that. But yeah, so multiply does a similar thing, but this is kind of like more like replacing where multiply just makes things darker and happens to mathematically work out as a way of coloring things. So yeah, so I think from a distance that'll work out okay. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a slope on these edges. We could do that, but then it would break up the smaller parts of these buildings. Like, yeah, even like anything that's more than 1 unit long, 1 block long. So, so remember, we did it with these gradients right here. So we don't have a way of masking out, okay, this one's on the end, that one's on the end. So yeah, just have to deal with that. And we can take a look at the geometry node. This pointiness value right here doesn't look like much here. Maybe if we adjust this, we can get a sharper. No, so that's probably dependent on the original geometry, so we can't get like a curvature map out of it. That's how we get a curvature map. Yeah, but okay, let's go back to combining these textures. So we have this plugged into the mix shader, plug this in the mix shader. We're going to get something halfway between, and that's because we need a sharp value between the mix shader, so 0 or 1, and we have that for this right here. Let's undo. Yeah, as you can see, I was trying to do that over here, so we'll get rid of that. And just to make this easier to find, we can bring this forward, bring these forward, and yeah, so it's driving this, so that's for the height. So let's actually put this in the section for height. So Alt J separates it, or Control J. Yeah, guess Control J brings it out, and yeah, so we'll name this stuff displacement. Whoa, sorry, bad typing. Displacement. And then we can check this out. And the roof should go all the way to the bottom. We can hardly see the ground, but yeah, if we get in there, we can start to see something. And yeah, and again, the same mask we used for the to color the roofs, we can use so we have this normal output right here that we started to use. We're going to use this to separate this from the walls. So there's going to be another mix shader that goes in here. Nice thing is so when I added this, notice it didn't have to take time to recalculate because it's not evaluating through the whole material right now. Right now it's only previewing this right here. And yeah, so if I plug this into here, we can flip this and add, let's just use the default principal BSDF, put in there, and then for the building textures, let's just use Voronoi. So just like that. And then in this case, let's use, so it doesn't take into account the displacement, we can just use position. So bring that down and scale it. So now we're going to get some windows here. If I use Math Node, we can adjust the stretch of these. So I think these windows are typically a bit taller. So we want a smaller value for that. Oh, sorry, this needs to change to multiply. That's the difficulty I'm having. So set these all to 1 so you can see something, and then so that's changing and that's changing. Oh yeah, so this needs to be 3D, and just the stretching, and some of these will show up better than others, and that's okay. I mean, that's just a quirk of using 3D textures on a plane that's at an angle. And we're just going to use distance to the edge, so we have that chart value again, just like we did with the ground cover. And yeah, so we'll get some windows. So we can make them a bit smaller, and maybe not all the houses have that, so we could use this white noise value, but maybe we want to use another one. So let's just Control-Shift-D, so we have this other value here that does the same thing, but let's also change the seed for it. So change that, I'll just put an add node here, so that'll just randomize this as I scan through it. And we're getting, we're getting this like vertical. Well, if I use add in a modulo and then set it to 1, so this will, if you look at what this does, if I set this to 1, it just cycles through, and actually, well, we're losing the vector right here. It turned into a single value, and that's why it doesn't look as random. Because a single value to this, that's why we get like this diagonal line. So we want to make sure this is actually vector math, so it's multiple values. So yeah, Shift S to switch those, and then changes to modulo. So we'll just do the same thing right here, and we're only dealing with vectors, so we only need to change the first 2 values. You can just even hide the other values with Control H, or anything that doesn't have an input. And yeah, so if we look at this now, we can randomize it better. We should be able to. What did I put in? Okay. oh, sorry, this isn't connected. Oops. Yeah, so you have something like that, and yeah, just make sure it'll repeat every 1, so pretty much anything between 0 and 1. So 0.1 will be the same as 2.1. It repeats every 1, or that was different. 0.1. I stand corrected. Yep. Yeah, I guess we don't even need the modulo now that we're working vectors, because I think that was the real issue there. And yeah, so let's plug that back into up here. Just gonna plug this mix shader while I try to remember what I was doing. So yeah, we have these windows. Yeah, we can randomize where they are with this. So just like I did before, I'm using a greater than to randomize this. And yeah, just put this in there. And then, so now it should be showing on some of the houses, but not all of them. And white multiplies. You don't get a result, so if I turn that to black, now we have a result here. And yeah, so if I just bring that up, and I guess we can make another material for the windows as well. Let's just use a glossy shader, so that gives it like just a reflective texture. That's what this is made for. It's just, these other shaders are just simplified Principled. Principled has pretty much everything in it. Yeah, and we'll mix, I guess we'll use another mix shader. So we can see this is going to here. We're getting walls, we have ground, and we have a roof. Excuse me. And maybe we can take off the top windows, since we're getting kind of a weird cutoff there. So if I look at, yeah, so this defines the height of these buildings. If I add that or subtract it to the height of this, we can, so just shift right, click and drag to get a reroute node. So I'm just moving that up here so it's easy to access. This is just plugged in the viewer output, which gets created when I do the shift control click to preview stuff, like plug into here. Notice now it's brought to that. Yeah, so with this I can I could just use position here and add that to it. So with position, and then add a principled or a separate XYZ in it, and then use the axis, so bottom to top. And I think generated will actually also do that, except it takes into account the height of the geometry. No, it doesn't seem to be working for that. So yeah, I'll just use this, and that'll be enough. I'll just, eyeball it. If I use this add, just change this to add, just plug that in there. Can get, well, it's just adding the shapes that we have down there. So right here. But if we use this and then we have like a color ramp, we can, the point at which it stops working should still be under our control. So we have the top right there. maybe this should be, we can make this a math node, subtract. Yeah, and so now we have it subtracted from the roof, the top part of the building, I think. Seems to be what happened. I think this gradient ends there. But we're not getting, yeah, so these outer buildings don't have any geometry to show that. Getting that down here. But, so this gradient, notice this gradient is different from that. So that, I think that shows that we're getting what we're, trying to find. And so we'll use that to mask out these windows right here. So these windows, we'll just multiply this by it. Let's flip this. Actually, let's switch this to less than or greater than that node. So I'm going to copy this value, and that will still work with this. I'll just copy that in there, and the cutting off point, just adjust for the top, because I'm readjusting there. And actually, we want to make this part the black part, so I'll just make this less than. And then we can multiply this right here. We're still getting top parts of some buildings. While not others. Must be because it's, oh yeah, we need to use another multiply. So this just makes these other parts black. We also need to just, use another one here. Plug in the multiply, turn it all the way up. Well, actually, it's turning off some of the, even more of the windows, so we can put this before. I think that order matters there. So we'll just put that in there. And we're getting, I think, negative values somewhere. So we need to clamp that to, that's why it's getting brighter. So because a negative times a negative is a positive. Well, actually, this doesn't go into here. We're going to use, that was going to the factor, that was messing things up. We need to multiply this part and put that in there. Turn that up. Yeah, so now we don't have any windows on the top, and we have some randomness with those. And we can use these windows as another mask. So we'll combine that before we mix this in. So yeah, we could maybe add some noise to this. Let's give the walls some texture, maybe like a yeah. So, and to make that nice and even, again, we need to just ignore the geometry and just think about the global position of the geometry. So instead I'm going to be using this geometry node and then position. So again, when we move this around or scale it, it doesn't take into account the actual geometry, it's just the position of it. So it's kind of like, you get like an MRI effect if you scan through it. So if I, cut off some of these values, bring this up, and then increase detail, some distortion. We get something that from a distance passes maybe as the type of wall texture you might run into in Italy. Glad to hear it. Thanks for letting me know. Do so. So this base color, let's take that out, and so this is the roof here. There's There's a mix shader. So some of these sides are getting masked out. We don't want that. Yeah, so there's a mistake in how I'm masking some of these out. I'll have to check on that. I think, so if we trace back this factor, it's all just going through here. That should just be the difference of the roof from the wall. If I look at this, if I keep sampling back, we can see that this is the first one that's not really working. And so, yeah, let's put this in shade smooth as well. See how that looks. Okay, so actually that's affecting our shading because we did some of the shading based on the normals, so that could potentially mess things up. Well, let's see if like the lighting will affect that. So let's try to increase this. And then, so yeah, everything's light over there. You know, the likely thing is that we just have a normal. So this is, yeah, this is plugged in normal. That's what's messing this up. So yeah, this needs to go in the height. Common mistake. And then turn down the strength. Yeah. So it's looking kind of swirly, so we can turn down the distortion. Don't really need much of that. That's where those swirls are coming from. Yeah, maybe we could distort it instead with a Musgrave texture. It's kind of more satisfying distortion. So with this Musgrave texture, let's plug that in here. Turn that way down. Yeah, and we want this to clip off the top values, so. Maybe we could even do a linear light with this values to get on this side, so instead of distorting it, we can also adjust, create variations in the height. So we're getting that in some places. Yeah, so if I turn that up, that'll get cut off. And we could flip this. Experiment. Yeah, I'm kind of liking it going inwards. Yeah. And then, yeah, let's add the windows because we made a mask for that. May as well use it, right? And do that. So we have this shader in here, and we want to introduce it on the walls. So that's where we're going to do it. And we can use this mask right here. I can just use sine, and that will just take the positive values. So anything above 0, and use as a mask for that. So I plug this into the mix shader, and then the glossy into here. Then we're going to get the windows. So we're getting some of them on top. Weird. So I think we're missing things in the mask. Oh yeah, we're going to start from here instead. I think we can adjust the square then value so we get more windows. Yeah. And so maybe it's a little hard to see. Maybe we could add some darkness to the windows. But they're there. They're reflecting. And so they're showing up cutting into the edges. can fix that with the gradients that we use for that. So let's go back to that window. So it's going along with whatever gradient that we're using on the rooftop right here. It's going against the direction of that peak. Yeah, so can just sample these. So remember the gradients we made over here, so these are the houses, and originally from here, so this is the one we're going to use to mask them out. And then use the greater than, and then yeah, put that in the greater than, and then yeah, just adjust this. So it's between 0 and 1. Otherwise it won't work. Change that to less than instead. So yeah, just to change what's black and white, and then yeah, we'll put that in over here. We're going to use, we can multiply it by this and then plug it in the sign. So we're using this factor here. We can, in this case, just do that. So black is not window, so we know that. And then so let's flip these actually, and then plug that into the sign right here. I actually want the windows to go inwards on this. So if I use a vector bump, and we could just press invert, and that will invert the height. And then, so we get that. We could decrease the strength and the distance, so it's not so sharp. Look at it directly and see how smooth it is. I want to adjust the size on this. So since I'm using color ramp, I probably just won't do invert and use it in the color ramp so I don't just get confused later on. And yeah, so just flip color ramp, and we can change this to cardinal. That will give us a nice bevel, I think, on the curve. So bring this out, and if we bring them closer, it's another way of adjusting the strength, but, which we could do in here. But if we get closer in the gradients, we can also fine-tune it more easily up here. You can also fine-tune by holding down Shift when you drag. And yeah, so we have windows, we have roofs, we have walls, and if you look really close, we have little pathways between for the walkways and stuff. So that's all nice. And yeah, and if we look at Venice, if we look at this map right here, which is just a snippet of part of Venice, clearly. There's all these variations in, they curve around. It's not on a grid. And so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to distort the position. So this is just using Z position. This is using UVs, so that we're going to need to distort that as well. If I Alt J, Control J, we can just take everything from UV right here. If we have it all going to the same coordinate, we can make sure that when we introduce distortion, we'll have the effect that we expect. It's Musgrave Texture. What does this do? So because it's in position, this won't matter so much. With the distortion, this will exist in whatever position. So I use that again here, so I don't need to worry so much about that for the type of distortion that I'm doing. So I'm just going to do this. And then I think the perfect noise texture is the Musgrave texture. So yeah, because it looks like this. And we're not going to make it that curvy, but it's a good stepping point. You can see the final result. I mean, if so I'll actually just sample the normal output so we can see the change that we're making. So you can see this is totally wrecking what we have. If it changes to linear light, yeah, that's how we distort, which I'm sure you've seen me do earlier. And we don't want to affect it on the z-axis. Right now it's deforming it in all x, y, and z, as you can see right here. So the 3 different directions. I'm going to save this real quick. And so what we can do is use separate. So separate XYZ and combine XYZ right here. And we're just going to use linear light on this and linear light on this. Wait a second, this is UV coordinate, so it shouldn't matter for Z, but I think it still kind of does. Like, it just considers it at 0 when you use UV coordinates. And so it still gets thrown off when you use distortion. I could be wrong about that though. So, but let's see. I mean, based on what we saw, that seems to be the case. But maybe that's just the impression I got. Yeah, so playing the Musgrave in here in this value, so we can adjust the strength of the linear light, and we can adjust the scale of the Musgrave. If we make it really big, this will make the changes more subtle. So you can see we're getting like this very wavy city, which is kind of cool. I mean, let's look at it with the material. So let's save it real quick. Yeah, so I mean it's closer to what we want. Because we have more curvature, there's more visible limitations from the geometry. Because if it's on a grid, and this geometry is literally on a grid, you can't see it, but the modifier is essentially doing this. And I'm going to need to subdivide it anyway, so it's all the geometry when you subdivide it, it's, in this case, is on a grid. But now, like, look, now that I've added that more geometry, we're getting less jagged edges. You can see if I turn this down, the effects. So, you know, if this is off, this is what it looks like. This is, so this is no subdivisions right here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, you can count, so I'm going to stop with that now. But yeah, and we're getting yeah. I could just experiment, like, just to see if I turn this all the way down and I just use vector rotation. We can plug this in the angle. Oh, let's change it to Z. So Z, right, is the top axis right here. So the Z axis it'll rotate around that. And that's pretty strong, so in this case we'll just adjust it with multiply right here. And it's rotating around a single point. Yeah, which is kind of cool. It's like the effect of a wraparound there. That's the Colosseum, right? Except that's Rome, a different Italian city. And so we're getting distortion there. Yeah, it's very stretchy right there. If I look back at the ground texture, we could change that back to position. We could change that to so actually the input and then geometry node. So vector. So now the ground will be independent of the curvature, which is kind of how they would do it. Like if they have to work with curvature, they're just going to lay the bricks out, you know, normally. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Another thing we can do is, well, yeah, I'm going to scale this up, let's say 4 times. Yeah, and you know, the UV, the height doesn't scale with that right here, but if I, actually, let's make an odd number, so let's do it 9 times. And then subdivide, and then change that to 3. So, and then do the same thing again. And then we can turn this down probably to like 5 or 6 to get what we had before. It might crash right now, but it's okay that I saved it. It's going well. We're pretty close to the end, but yeah, my computer just loaded when you asked that question. So, but yeah, thanks. I'm doing well. I'm glad everybody's checking on me. Appreciate it. So yeah, let's change this to 6. Good thing it didn't quit. So yeah, I mean, even better now, right? But will it quit now? So this is probably enough geometry, and then I was doing that to, if I reset the UVs, it'll just make a square for each of these, and then it's repeating, so each of these squares have the same UV position. If you open the UV editor, you can see it's just, it looks like a single square, but it's all of these squares just drawn there. So if I use follow active quads, we get this grid pattern. And oh yeah, so interesting, right here we have the negative space, so it's not working over there. And with these coordinates, getting a lot of very clear distortion. And wait, let's check if this is like the original plane. Yeah, so I did that. This should be the original space I had here. But yeah, let's adjust the variation here. So I'm using this rotate to, but see, it's rotating from a single point, and that's just kind of to show it's going to get more distorted the further you get from it. In this case, let's use a sun for, you know, larger areas. It makes more sense. It's not as dramatic, so that's a lot of times it just doesn't give me a clear cue on the geometry. But thanks, appreciate it. It's really distorted. If you rewind 5 minutes, it still looked like a city, and not a some kind of geology thing, a digging site. I don't know, but yeah. If I, oh, and this should be multiply because I'm trying to adjust the strength. So yeah, 0. This is kind of what it looked like before. Oh, and yeah, that's interesting because this part's negative, and I'm relying on the the y-axis to get this. So, and that's, yeah, so that's why your the negative side isn't going to show up, isn't going to use those axes, because the negative area, that's a value that gets clamped, it's cut off. But yeah, so if let's multiply, add more distortion, make it more interesting. So that's too much. We can also adjust this texture, change like the levels that it distorts. Let's try like something really subtle. Yeah. So notice, yeah, it's less distorted here, and then it gets more distorted, and that's because we're using rotate. Just something I just wanted to try, but let's just use this linear light like I was doing before. Yeah, so just kind of be patient with the previews. Geez, it's like all of a sudden just start getting pretty crazy. Let's, yeah, holding down shift to give a subtle alteration. Yeah, so that's kind of cool. Oh, yeah, I mean, you could use this on a texture for a weave or something. I mean, you wouldn't have like this randomness to it unless it was like somebody was weaving for fun. So what my sister does, she has a loom, which is like this big thing. If some of you aren't familiar, and you use yarn and you just like line it up, then you like it's like a kind of an older machine for creating textiles. But yeah, so we're getting some variation there, and we could even let's add. I mean, this wouldn't be Venice without water, right? So let's do that. And I'm going to base off this distortion, so it'll reflect the curvature. Let's just try 0.15 and see if I can live with that. I mean, let's check these out. Like, look at the really distorted ones and be like, okay, maybe that's not such a, yeah. Yeah, let's try 0.1. Yeah. And yeah, so let's look at this height, and then this node tree is bigger than my future. Well, I mean, you'd have to have a pretty big future to be any bigger than, well, I guess the node tree, yeah, you just take them one step at a time, but yeah, when you take a step back, it's like, wow, that was a lot. It's like, it's crazy to think how many times you breathe in a day, But, yeah, so let's create some pools, water there. And maybe we can use another distortion. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you think this is big, that's probably a good thing, right? Because that means that, I mean, even if you have a pretty big future, it's probably not as big as a snow tree, so. Yeah, just trying to look at the bright side, I guess. Okay, so yeah, we're getting kind of a river pattern. I guess I could just use a color ramp in that case if I'm gonna be that sparing with the wave texture. So if I bring this in, sharpen the value, put something on the other side, and yeah, so we're gonna just mask out. Just thinking out loud. If I use, well, yeah, I always try to think out loud so you guys can tell what I'm doing. But yeah, if I use this absolute value, it's gonna do a mirror on whichever section. So that's kind of what I was already doing with this, but it was like, why use a wave texture? It's not really the most sensical way. If I just want this river, but I don't want that much of it, I could maybe try using this Musgrave Texture again, or another one. And yeah, Control-Shift-D. Let's use a larger value, well, larger size, which is a smaller scale value. And maybe we should use that for this 0.4, just to make this pooling fewer. And I guess we'll change this value. Not that big. Not that big, small, it depends on what part you're asking about. But, so let's try 1. Yeah, beautiful. So if I use, actually not using that color ramp anymore. Oh, and let's adjust the scale. I think this is half because we subtracted only 0.06. Whatever. So let's just add this to here. And so it gets a little thicker in some places, just a little more interesting. And if we want maybe that not that sharp, so we can fine tune this like that. And maybe bring this value down a bit. Okay, so let's turn that up so it's pretty dramatic. And then, so this range will make it more of a difference. So, if I bring this up, yeah. So I'm thinking about doing more challenges. This was my first stream where I consistently did a challenge every day, but I'm hoping to continue that in December, and I might like design my own challenge or something. And yeah, if you guys have any thoughts about that, I'd be interested. I might do like a month on character art or something. You know, maybe like, you know, modeling, texturing, rigging a character, one character every day. Maybe like just by, you know, saving time by reusing the same base mesh or something. Yeah, curious what you guys think about that. So if we use a threshold, we can see in that river there. The character would be great, yeah. Cool. Yeah, and I think like a week of a different inspiration, and but these are, you know, it's just an idea right now, so we'll see how that goes. Because you know, it depends on, you know, how quickly I can make that, and yeah, it would be pretty hard, yeah, for sure. I think like if you've seen some of my videos, like I've been able to do it pretty quickly. Like the Spider-Man one I did in like maybe 5 hours, even though that wasn't a complete body, but I didn't start with a base mesh for that one. I started from a sphere. So I think like if, you know, potentially I could, yeah, I could try it, see how it goes, and you know, that's how I approached this. I was like, if I don't finish it, you know, at least I tried, or you know, and if you're a few days behind, you know, don't stop. I do not. I haven't heard of that. Sorry, Dragus. So, yeah, let's just get the displacement in here. So, if I multiply this, is that something I should check out? Do so. So now we have it it's kind of just cutting through the buildings. We could add like a little path as well using the same height alpha from that we used to make the water. And I guess this should be in proportion to the buildings. It should be a little bit wider. So let's bring that out, multiply it. Yeah, so that should be better. And we can use a glossy. Maybe we can just get lazy and use the same texture I use for the windows. No, I mean, it's just this is a glass shader. Let's create the cape of a character to wave an engine. Such knowledge would be useful. Oh yeah, yeah, bringing clothing to an engine, like, yeah, you were talking about that last stream. Yeah, that'd be cool. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I think showing the full workflow for stuff like, yeah, bringing to an engine would be, you know, a good thing to reach in the, you know, if I were to do a daily challenge. But see how much I can do in a day. Yeah, maybe it could be like a week or something. But yeah, glossy isn't really. It kind of gives us metallic kind of feel. So I might just use, I'll just use principled BSDF, turn down the roughness. And then the noise in the water, like you could use a noise texture. You kind of get, you know, people look at it and it's like, oh yeah, it kind of looks like water. I think you have to use a few of them overlaid in order to get a good effect. So just to make it independent of the geometry, I'm going to use position of the other distorted stuff, and then yeah. So where's the light? Why aren't you doing anything, huh? I guess we need to preview everything. Well, this shader isn't incorporating this yet, so let's bring it in at the end. I don't think I've used this many mix shaders together before. Wuxia manga. Long robes and sleeves that waves in the wind would be cooler than that. Yeah, I think, well, my thoughts about, like, if I were to do, like, a month of character modeling, then maybe I could do something else, like, environment modeling, you know, the month after that, or, you know, just, you know, not to promise anything yet, because we'll just see how it goes, but it's just a thought to explore, but right now. But yeah, I think it'd be, you know, I could do a week of pop culture, a week of like, yeah, you know, so that could be movies and comic books and like mainstream stuff. Maybe that'd be the first week, just to get people's attention or something. And then, you know, and then there'd be a week of like my own personal interests, media that I use, and then, yeah, it's really, yeah, it really has to, there's stuff that you can translate to make for your own stuff, but yeah, I'm just gonna have to use my own kind of interests to keep me motivated, and you know, I wanted to reach for you know, the most people, so let's try increasing this value again, more distortion, but you know, it's still a grid that we're distorting, which is different from this, where I mean, it mostly actually does kind of stay on a grid, but like right here we have this, and then where it's thicker. You like that I take challenging things? Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you appreciate that. I think, yeah, it'd be cool to, yeah, I think doing different specific artists, styles, you know, because there's value in doing things realistically, and then, but like, you know, with photo scans and stuff, nowadays it's maybe not as important as doing, say, as a stylized thing. Maybe that's not as useful, but I think starting and studying things from life and understanding that massively improves style, because it shows you how to prioritize different details, which is pretty much the one thing that defines different people's styles. And yeah, so let's decrease that. We want layers of noise, not that many. So I'm just gonna, yeah, sample this so we can get the preview quicker. And as I was saying, like, we're just gonna copy that and then shift it over a little bit. Yeah, and if I use linear light, they'll just clip into each other. Yeah, so you get, this looks like a subtle difference here, but I think in the water, the more, you know, the rippling just comes from, one thing is the wind from one direction, and then it rippling from like the edges that it bounces off of. So it's actually, it is really like, the most realistic approach would, like, you know, wave textures and incorporating that way. Oh my gosh, yeah. I always do that last, and then, like, I've just doing these tutorials, I show people, like, just to show them the correct way to set it up. I like have trained myself to just put this last, to show this is wrong. This is also wrong if it's in the normal. This is, but yeah. So thank you for that, Miles. Yeah, and there's like under the water, there's like, oh, subsurface all the way up would change it to totally green, but I want it. Water, when you go underneath, is a different color than at the top. So, you know, you can sort of make, you know, I think that with that, subsurface is more important at this scale. I mean, it's weird because material properties kind of can be interpreted differently depending on the scale of something. Bump right here is really functioning as roughness when you're far away from it. And yeah, so, and with this, like water, if you took a cup of water, there isn't any subsurface, but, you know, when all of that pigment that gets into it from, like, I don't know, like plants and stuff, algae, it adds up. So, yeah, I'm not liking the sun. So I could use an HDRI and put this in here. It kind of leads to like slower sampling though, I find. Like it just is fuzzy. It takes longer for it to get grasps on how the lighting should be. But yeah, this is kind of dark, isn't it? I mean, we should darken it a bit. So turn down the value. Maybe not that much. Yeah, and then we're getting this on the edge, and that's just a result of limitations in the slope and geometry. Yeah, and I think this won't, because there's just a sharp value between these two, we're not even gonna get something worthwhile there. But yeah. If we, yeah, we could add, what could we add? So let's go back to the Musgrave right here. We have this texture, or not that texture, this, we can use another one for like a path. I'm not sure exactly if we can make these docks. Because, I mean, if I use a wave texture, you know, the one approach I can think of with that is using wave texture and plugging it in. Let's see, like, okay, this is going this way, we want something perpendicular to that. So X is going to go that way, and I think Y will pretty much do the same. Yeah, because, I mean, we don't have, this isn't a texture input, this is a single value, so it's not going to work. But we could, yeah, it's not going to work. Too bad. But we will, I think it would add a little bit of something to add a walkway there, so I'm going to add yet another mix shader. Yes. Try adding a, yeah, okay, just read that. Okay. I just want it in the water part, so I'll just mix it in with wherever that shader is. It's right here. Mix shader. We can just sample the water here, and we have this greater than node, Control-Shift-D to make a copy of that, and we can just use that to mask, to have a second mask for the sidewalk. So we want that to be actually smaller than the other one. We just have this one plugged into displacement, so and this part will get cut off because where it's placed within this long network of mix shaders right here. So if I just put that in here, we can get a better idea of that walkway. It's a very thin walkway overall, so maybe just have that 0.005. Other direction, 0.015. Okay, I'll buy that. And yeah, and once I plug this shader in, we can just call it, and I can wish you guys a good night or morning or whatever it is where you are. And yeah, so I'll make this darker. Let's use the. I mean, it might be a different thing for the walkway here, but we made a nice stone texture right here. So let's just put that in there. I mean, it's not that nice, but at this distance, you can't. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell. So, and we could have gone back and combined it with the ground alpha there and just replaced the water there. So maybe there's a redundant mix shader here, and we could have just reordered this. But yeah, I mean, there you go. That's what we have. 11 a.m. where I am. Wow. Yeah, you're around the world. 6:30 here, or 6:40, 6:39. Well, like it makes that much of a difference. People get so fixated on those little differences, and it's kind of funny. But just like, between the minute, 6:39, not 6:40. But wow, yeah, yeah. Well, I hope your morning's going well. Nice of you to, fly all the way around the world or whatever, to 1 a.m. Yep. Well, it's tough. Well, I feel less bad about streaming at what I think are odd times, because I guess it's just going to be an odd time for somebody no matter what. But yeah, so maybe area light, just make that big, and then this will just kind of focus it. It's like we can use this kind of like a sunlight, but it focuses more on an area. And yeah, maybe I will add an HDRI. So it's just I have just one downloaded. What am I doing? Yeah, plug environment texture, open, downloads. You can see this downloads for all my thumbnails, and then it's pink because we don't have a texture. Now we have a texture, and I'll turn it down. Just don't really need to use it that badly. And 0.05. How about that? And yeah, so yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah, there's Venice, I guess, and you know, Venice is way more interesting than this. I am doing it injustice, I have to say. You know, beautiful place, tons more variation than, I mean, yeah, it does kind of look like every building's the same when you look at it from this top view, but yeah, it's a beautiful city. There's a lot of different stuff going on, and like, yeah, look at this view right here. I can make this bigger. Like, it's beautiful. Look at that brick. Yeah, you're gonna see. I mean, I made all these walls plaster, and like, I mean, there's some plaster in the back, but look, it's orange here, and then there's white there, and then brick. It's beautiful. But thank you, Miles. Appreciate it. It's yeah, I guess it helps, you know, to have somebody to counter, you know, if you know, I'm doing all the trash talking, so that's nice. Was I in Venice? I've never been to Venice. I just thought it was a cool city, but yeah, that'd be cool to go sometime, and a lot of different places in Italy. My partner, she went to Venice in college, so I don't know. Beautiful place, but yeah, cool art, history. Yeah, from what I hear. Yeah, thanks for watching, you guys. Take care, and yeah, have a good night. So yeah, bye bye. Control save. All right.